Welcome, everybody, back to another playoff preview series. This one's going to be covering the Western Conference Final for the NHL. My name is Jim Parsons here with the Hockey Writers. Got a couple very distinguished scribes with us today. They're going to be covering these two teams. Matthew Zator is going to be covering the Dallas Stars, and Ben Fisher, of course, with the Vegas Golden Knights. Matthew, how you doing, buddy?
Doing good. It's some interesting teams in the Eastern and Western Conference Finals that I don't think anyone anticipated the matchups that are kind of going on, but it's always fun to have interesting stuff happen in the playoffs. So,
at the sake of sounding insensitive and potentially whatever, would this be maybe ranking among the least exciting four teams that are in the possible Western Conference or Eastern Conference Finals? Like, is this one of those things where the NHL might be super happy, but fans are like, really? No original six teams, no Canadian teams, no, like, what are we looking at here? Is this the way you had envisioned this unfolding?
Not really. I thought, honestly, I had Boston going to the final. And I did have Carolina going far. So, but my two actually, I did have the Dallas Stars in the Stanley Cup final. So it was Boston and Dallas was my final. So I could be half right.
Ben, what about you? Or is this a surprise to you? I mean, Vegas has been a solid team all season. They've made it through a couple of pretty strong contenders here and pretty handily beat the Edmonton Oilers, I will say. What is this looking like for you? What do you think of these four teams that are in this now?
Well, I'll tell you what, as you know, Jim, I mean, that second round series against Edmonton, that could have been anyone's series going in, and especially, with the top guys doing what they were doing with the Oilers, then there was certainly some momentum there, and it was a good test of Bruce Cassidy's system in Vegas, and the fact that after a weird first four games, the fact that Vegas was able to settle things down, I think, is a big confidence boost moving forward, obviously. And now, I mean, you've got a wide open, as you guys mentioned, unpredictable last four teams. I guess unpredictability in itself is a bit of a selling point, but this I didn't see us ending up here, that's for sure.
Yeah, no, these are interesting matchups. In this case, we're going to be talking about two really strong teams with some really strong offensive ability, and they played solid all year. So let's break it down a little bit. We'll start with Matthew, just talking about what you saw from the previous series with Dallas. I think both you and I had predicted that they would probably get through this one. I was won't lie, sort of looking forward to the idea of expansion teams facing off against each other. But I did think Dallas was probably going to pull this one out. I credit to Seattle for giving them a run for their money, though. What did you make of the series? How did you think Dallas looked against Seattle? They were able to get rid of them in 7, but it took 7 games to do it. What did you make of Dallas's performance there?
Well, it was an interesting series because both teams it was kind of a back and forth. Like one team would blow the one out and the other would blow the other out. It's like there was no real close games until game 7, where both goaltenders were like, okay, we're not going to let anything in now for one game. And the rest of the games, they were all pretty high scoring. So, the Stars had a lot of their offense was driven by Joe Pavelski, Roope Hintz. Those two guys, and then Wyatt Johnston scores the game winner in game 7, and youngest player to ever do it, which is pretty cool. Jaromir Jagr, I believe, was the last one as being the youngest to score a game winner in game 7, and Johnston now he's taken over that spot. So it was fun to see a lot of these guys. Like, you have the youth, you had, like I say, Pavelski's the oldest player, and he did a bunch. So he had the 4-goal game in the first game in game 1, and then it was, I believe, he had ended up with like 8 goals or something in the series. So it's like it was a lot of Pavelski, and then Hintz kind of came alive later in the series as well. And one guy that I was interested, Jason Robertson, didn't really do much in that series, and he only has 2 goals in the playoffs. I think that was a big thing I saw from it, that Robertson wasn't very dominant in that series. So they were driven by Pavelski most part, and then Johnston kind of finished it off. But yeah, it was an interesting series to watch, to see how Dallas played against the Kraken, because they didn't look good at times, and then other times they looked really good. So it's gonna be interesting to see how they play against Vegas.
Yeah, Vegas is consistent, right? They will attack you and relentlessly and not stop, and they can score goals. Rupe Hintz has 19 points in the playoffs. You talk about Jason Robertson, both you and I had specifically said I thought he was going to have a breakout series. It didn't exactly happen, but he has 12 points. Max Domi with 11, Joe Pavelski with 10, Jamie Benn with 10. So they're spreading out the scoring a little bit. Ben, what do you think for Vegas? Right now, it's Jack Eichel with 14 points, Mark Stone with 12, Chandler Stevenson with 10, Marcia So, who was very good against the Oilers, with 10, Ivan Barbashev with 9. They're spread out pretty well. Jack Eichel's been fantastic for them in his first appearance in the playoffs. What did you make of you talked a little bit about it, Vegas against the Oilers here, and how their playoffs have looked to date so far?
I mean, I think, well, you nailed it with the Eichel comment. I think the big guns are delivering right now, and I mean, for all the digital ink that was spilled over the Eichel trade, and of course some of the fallout, and I mean, the we've the hindsight on that trade has been evaluated not necessarily in our favor, but you know what? I mean, this is the time that Vegas acquired him for, and in his first ever NHL postseason, Eichel's been delivering. He's been fantastic, and of course, lined up with Marchessault there. Marchessault had the natural hat trick in Game 6 to pretty much wrap up the series, and I think when your biggest contracts, your biggest names are the ones that are stepping up, that's a pretty easy recipe to some success right there. So I think on the front end, you've got some big names that are leading the charge, and on the back end, I mean, it seems like it doesn't matter who we put in net. We're finding a way where, I mean, Laurent Brossoit, of course, goes down with injury in Game 3, and he had been outstanding through the first round and early on, and then Adin Hill steps in and was just did what he needed to do over the remaining 3 games there. And I mean, I think that says a lot about both the goaltending depth of the organization, but it also speaks volumes of the discipline of the system, the depth of the blue line, and really just the fact that the Golden Knights have built an environment where the defense is strong enough that it allows goaltenders to thrive pretty much no matter what situation they're coming in at.
Yeah, I was going to actually ask about that, so we might as well transition to it right now. The goaltending matchup here, Adin Hill, there was potential for possibly Jonathan Quick to get in a couple of those games, or at least one of those games against Edmonton when they got scored on a lot, but it didn't actually happen. Adin Hill did pull through. Oilers goaltending wasn't quite up to par, and Vegas was able to outscore them in that regard. And then on the other side, Jake Oettinger had kind of a rough go of it for a little bit. He was pulled, but he came back and was fantastic in their Game 7. So I'll start with Matthew. I mean, who's got the goaltending advantage here? We've talked at length about how good Jake Oettinger has been. Is this still Dallas's advantage? Even that the bumps in the road for Oettinger, is this still pretty much, Dallas is the leg up here?
Well, I mean, Oettinger, like you said, he was kind of up and down throughout the series, and it looked like he was going to be beaten. But then Game 7, he just seems to be able to come to play. And like last season as well, had a really good Game 7 and brought them through to almost the second round in that one. So it was interesting to see how he played throughout. And I wasn't sure how he's going to play in Game 7, just how he was throughout the rest of that round. But I mean, I think he still has the skill to step up, like we saw in that Game 7. He kind of shut it down, and so I don't know. I mean, it's going to be interesting to see because, like I said, Adin Hill has been really good since he came in for Vegas, and I think it's going to be an interesting matchup because, like I say, Oettinger has shown he can step up when needed, and we know how skilled he is because I mean, last playoffs he was just lights out against the Flames.
Ben, is there any concern at all with the goaltending in Vegas? They've used 5 throughout the year. Brossoit is injured. We don't exactly know what Jonathan Quick would look like if he were to get in net there. What happens if Dallas goes off early in this series, is there concern from that end? You talked about how the goaltending has stepped up when needed in Vegas, but what happens if they get lit up a little early here?
Yeah, well, it's funny you mentioned 5 goalies used this year, and that doesn't even include Robin Lehner, who was theoretically going to be our number one goalie going into the year. But amidst all the flux, it hasn't really slowed them. And so at this point, I don't know if the faith is so much necessarily in Adin Hill as it is in just whether it's by committee or what they have to do, that it's a tough enough defensive team that they're going to prevent goals simply by virtue of the system that's in place. I think that if Hill falters or God forbid if there's another injury, any scenario where they need someone else to come in, I actually don't think it's going to be quick. But Logan Thompson has been quietly working his way back to health, and I mean, obviously, he hasn't played in in months. But I think that for Bruce Cassidy right now, I think the faith is more so to go back to Logan Thompson and see if he can figure it out rather than Quick, who, let's face it, is not the same goalie of the Kings Stanley Cup years.
Matthew, let's switch gears a little bit and talk about strategies going into this series. We saw the Oilers attempt to put the Vegas Golden Knights on tilt, really physical against them. For a while, it looked like maybe it worked. Alex Pietrangelo, and I'll talk with Ben about this in a minute, sort of snapped there and slashed Leon Draisaitl, which was a whole big story in Edmonton and around the hockey world. Do you think Dallas goes in? I mean, they're a big, strong team. Do they go in with the same approach? Because it didn't end up panning out very well for the Oilers. Yes, they were more physical, and yes, they were able, but Vegas was able to play that game too. They got Edmonton frustrated at times. The Oilers took some bad penalties when they didn't need to and shot themselves in the foot a lot. So what does Dallas do as a strategy to try to, get the advantage early in this series?
Yeah, I mean, the one thing about the Stars, and this is, I mean, the playoffs have been interesting of how they've played because they haven't looked at times like the Dallas Stars of the regular season. But I think they have the players that can play that type of style, like Mason Marchment, like I've mentioned him before. Guys like Pavelski have shown to be that gritty side. They have the players that can do it. Max Domi is another one that kind of gets under people's skin. So, I mean, I don't know if they're going to try to do that for sure, but I mean, they've got the depth and they showed it against the Kraken. I mean, the Kraken went through the playoffs from their depth. If Jason Robertson can get going, finally, I think this team is going to be able to outscore the Golden Knights if it comes down to a shootout type series. The Kraken series was that. I mean, it seemed like it until Game 7. It was just back and forth. Both teams would just blow each other out. I don't know if this is that type of series. I think it may be a lot closer because both teams play a really good two-way type structured game. So yeah, I don't know what it's the same thing with the Panthers Hurricane series. You don't know really what to make out of how this is all going to go. But I think if it does come down to that physical type series, I think the Stars can do it. I don't know if that's the way to beat the Golden Knights, but we'll see. It's going to be interesting to see how it all kind of plays out.
Yeah, for sure. Ben, what about Vegas's strategy? I mean, they, in a way, played a lot of run again against the Oilers, which you would think on paper is not a good idea, right? The Oilers are the highest scoring offensive team in the league. Their power play was dynamic, record breaking, but Vegas sort of beat them at their own game in a lot of respects. Does that strategy work against the Dallas Stars? Is it even more sound? Is it a better way to go? Because they're not playing. Dallas has got offensive, potency, but not like the Oilers did. So what does Vegas do here in this series? Like, how would they try to get the early advantage here?
Well, Jimmy hit the nail on the head there. I mean, I was surprised to see how open and flowing some of those Oilers games were, because throughout the regular season, Vegas showed that is not their style of play. I mean, we saw it a bit in the Winnipeg series in round 1, but they've managed pretty well in more of a high speed up and down game over the last 2 rounds. But I think that if this is going to be a series that's won in the trenches, I think that suits Vegas just fine. I think their identity was built on depth and third and fourth grind lines, and guys like William Carrier, and we saw Keegan Colasar get pretty feisty. So it's not, I mean, throughout the year, it really wasn't the top line guys that were necessarily the difference makers in Vegas. And I think that if this series against Dallas, it does look like it could revert back to more of a gritty, hard-nosed sort of, I guess, grinded out battle. And I think you could see a bit of an identity flip pretty quickly for Vegas.
I did want to ask you, what did you make of the Pietrangelo slash? So he obviously was upset with the Evander Kane cross check into the boards. I get it, totally, whatever. The slash was pretty violent though, and then afterwards he comes out in the media and he talks about how he didn't feel like the DOPS, Department of Player Safety, really took into account what was going on prior to the incident. What'd you make of it from a Vegas perspective? And what Pietrangelo did there, was one game fair, but is he crying foul after the fact? Like there's some sort of agenda against, like, what happened there? How did you see that?
Yeah, that raised some eyebrows. And I mean, the matching it up with the nurse suspension, obviously that was sort of a a bit of a wash there. But I mean, I was surprised to see it out of Pietrangelo, just veteran who's been around and who's certainly been around some has some pretty decorated playoff experience, and he's been through it before. He knows the nature of the beast come the NHL postseason. And I mean, I don't know if this was one particular slash that was just a little bit too much for him, but seeing him lose his composure like that is not the Alex Pietrangelo that we've become accustomed to. So, I mean, I think that looking at it, I think the game and you move on is probably fair, given that, of course, a one-game suspension in the playoffs is not the same as a one-game regular season suspension. So it does carry a little more weight. And I mean, if this is an opportunity for some of the Stars guys to see a chance to get under his skin, then it's possible that he's created a little target on himself. We'll see.
Yeah. Matthew, so you can get in on this conversation. Just want to ask you, what did you make of the fact that it was, while the two incidences were very different, but the one game suspension sort of wash between Darnell Nurse on a technicality as an instigator at the end of the game, and then Pietrangelo for the slash? What does that make the league look like? Like, how do you perceive that when you see a situation where you're like, these two guys get the same amount of time for completely different reasons? Do you see that as a bad look? Do you see that's like, yeah, no, I understand why they did it. One game, let's call it even and we'll move on. Like, how did you take that?
Yeah, that whole thing. I mean, I don't know. Like the thing is, like you said, they're totally different, and you get one game suspensions for each. I mean, yeah, like you say, what kind of precedent is that setting? I mean, it's so, I mean, one game for an instigator and one game for, yeah, like I say, a very vicious slash. If that's the case, that one should have got 2 games. But I don't know. The officiating is interesting on how they make decisions on these suspensions, because I've had questions on other things of why some aren't suspended and why some get 5, when the one that wasn't suspended should have gotten that. So, yeah, I don't know if it's ever going to be something that everyone's going to agree on.
Yeah, I mean, you can look all the way back even for Dallas, right? And the Pavelski hit early on in the series against Minnesota, that was deemed a clean hit, and some people would say it wasn't, right? So you never really know exactly where the officials are going to lie on this kind of stuff, but it's an interesting storyline in these playoffs this year. Let's talk a little bit about players to watch. Matthew, I'll start with you. If you're looking at the Dallas Stars and you're trying to pick out somebody that you think could have a big series or that you're going to keep an eye on here against Vegas, who are you watching?
Well, I'll still keep an eye on Joe Pavelski, because he just seems like he's, like you say, he's found the fountain of youth. I mean, it's just no doubt about it. He just keeps scoring. Regular season, playoffs, he's come, like you say, had eight goals in this series, or in this past round 2 series, and it just seems like he's not slowing down. And that line with Rupe Hintz is just on fire. I think they're their best line. If Jason Robertson, like I said, if he can get going, then I think the Golden Knights have some, but they dealt with Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl. So I don't know. Hey, so I'm definitely watching Joe Pavelski. I'll be watching Jason Robertson, like I said, because he just does show he can score goals in the regular season. So it's just a matter of time before he breaks out. Like, he has 12 points in 13 games, but only 2 of them are goals. And he scored quite a bit in the regular season, and that's what he's known for. He's got to get going scoring. So, I mean, I'll be watching him for sure. So, I mean, those are the guys. I think those are the big guys that are going to make a difference in this series. And then Jake Oettinger. If he can keep going from that game 7, just parlay that into the rest of the Western Conference Final, the Golden Knights are going to have a hard time scoring on him. And we know how he can catch on fire, like I said, from last season. So the Golden Knights better hope it's not now that he's going to start becoming that type of goaltender.
All right, Matthew, I'll ask you this follow-up question, and then Ben, I'll ask you the same 2 questions. So you mentioned Pavelski, Robertson, and Oettinger. If the Dallas Stars are going to win this series, who's the MVP? Is it one of those 3, or is it somebody else?
I'm going to say it's one of those guys. I think it's going to be, and it's Pavelski, because he just never ceases to amaze of how he just seems like he's in his 20s all the time. And even though he is, 38, something like that. So he just doesn't seem like he's found, like, Father Time just maybe has a deal with him or something. I don't know.
Yeah, no, it is amazing that he signed that deal with Dallas, and everyone's like, man, that seems like a lot of money. And he's just provided way more value than that money and that contract was ever going to be worth. Ben, what about you? Who are you watching in this series for Vegas? You mentioned Jack Eichel. Is he the guy that you're keeping your eyes on to see if he can continue this strong production and offensive play, or is there somebody else you're kind of keeping an eye on here?
Well, I mean, I think Eichel's flipped a switch in terms of taking on more of an alpha role, specifically in the offense, and so I think he's definitely found something that I see continuing on. But the guy that I'm looking at more interestingly is Mark Stone, our captain. I mean, I think he's just right there with Eichel in the scoring. I think you mentioned 12 points in 11 games, and it's sort of almost been overshadowed based on the story of Eichel in his first postseason. But let's not forget that Mark Stone, under somewhat dubious circumstances, was playing game 1 of the first round, was his first game in months. He had miraculously recovered just in time for the postseason when the salary cap no longer back. But anyway, I mean, there was rust to account for, and now 11 games later, that rust should be completely off, and I think that he looks poised to elevate his game a little bit and get right back into the mix there. I would also look at a little more under the radar, but Nicholas Hague on the back end has sort of quietly taken on a larger and larger role as the postseasons worn on, and he was getting some pretty significant power play quarterback time towards the end of the Oilers series, and his minutes were quietly going up a little bit. I think Bruce Cassidy's developing more and more trust in him, and Vegas has a pretty deep blue line, but I think that I wouldn't be surprised to see him take on a more significant than expected role in this next series.
Yeah, I will say I was quite impressed with Mark Stone. We talked about Pietrangelo and how the Oilers targeted him. Well, they targeted Mark Stone too, because they knew that injury. They were cross-checking him in the back on every whatever, and it was very impressive. Mark Stone did kind of lose it a little bit, but not to the point where he was ever really frustrated and taken out of his game. He was just angry, but it sort of motivated him. Like, he even played better and better and better, even though the Oilers were targeting him. So I was really impressed by him. Who would be your MVP here if the Vegas Golden Knights are going to pull this series out against the Dallas Stars? Is it Stone? Is it Hague? Is it somebody else? Who do you think the MVP is going to be here?
Well, I'm going to revert back, not to go obvious here, but Eichel just looks like a guy who has figured out this whole playoff thing and has fully embraced it. And it's not just the points. It's the fact that he's going into corners. He's making a lot of smart, small decisions along the way. He's just every shift seems to bring something where he's helping his team in one zone or another. And so I think that if the Golden Knights are going to be the one that moves on to the Stanley Cup final, it's going to be Eichel that's getting them there.
All right. Finally, to close this out, Matthew, we'll start with you. Let's predict the series here. So what do the numbers look like? Are you predicting Dallas, Vegas? How many games? What do you think is going to happen here in this series?
Again, this is a tough one to gauge. I'm not sure how it's all going to go. So I always go safe. I'll go 7 games. I think it's going to go 7. I said the Panthers, Hurricanes is going to go 7 as well. But I'll stick to my prediction from before, and I'll go the Dallas Stars making the Stanley Cup final, and it'll be in 7 games.
Ben, what about you? Are you going with Vegas? Are you going with Dallas? And if you're going with one of these two teams, which you obviously will do, how many games do you think it's going to take?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a little homerism here on both sides, because I like the Golden Knights to take this one in 6. Although I will say that as Matthew mentioned right off the hop, if Jason Robertson can get going, if he decides this is the point where he really puts himself into the next gear, then that could be just one more interesting dimension here that could really change the face of the series. But I think that Vegas playing with confidence, they trust each other. They have their high-end talents getting it done. So I think they're ready to move on. I think this is their year.
I'm going to go with Vegas, as painful as that is for me to say, considering they just eliminated the Edmonton Oilers, which is the team that I cover on a regular basis. I just was super impressed. Like, there were moments where Edmonton beat themselves, but you got to give credit to the Vegas Golden Knights. They played a really solid series. They beat Oilers at their own game in some of those contests, and they just were relentless. Like, they just kept coming at them. And I don't know that the Oilers were able to handle that kind of pressure very well. It was a different style for them, and Vegas, it really impressed me. The other thing with Dallas is I think they're a really strong team, and I had picked them to beat Seattle, but I did not necessarily think Seattle was going to give them such a run for their money. That concerns me slightly. So I think Vegas is probably going to take this one, but I'm going to be like Matt. I'm going to say 7. I think this is going to be a long series. I think both teams know how to not only win, but not lose necessarily, if that makes any sense. Like, they have this ability to sort of shut things down and keep things in control and not get blown out by anybody or make it a really ugly loss or anything like that. So they'll find ways to keep this close. That's why I think it's going to be 7, but I'm going with Vegas. I have a feeling that we could be looking at Vegas and possibly Carolina in the finals, which would be really interesting for TV ratings, but we'll see how that all goes. Thanks, guys. I appreciate it. One of you will be back on here to talk about the final when we get to that point. If it's a long series, we'll be talking in a couple of weeks here, but we appreciate everybody doing that. Check out the rest of the videos as we get down here with the conference finals. We are only down to two videos here, and then we'll have one more, but there's tons of content. The archives are there for the YouTube page. Lots of great stuff on the hockeyraiders.com. You can check it all out. Thanks for watching. Enjoy the series. Go Vegas, go Dallas, go whomever you're cheering for, and put it in the comment section. Let us know, who do you think is going to win? Who's going to be the MVP, and how many games does it take to get it all done? We'll talk to you on the next one.